Every single trader would be profitable if they could just sit on their hands and wait for their A grade setups to come through. A trader knows what their A grade setups are. So when they come along, they take those setups. But the thing that undoes a trader's profitability are those B grade, low quality setups. And then the boring period of having to sit on your hands and waiting for those A grade setups to come through. That's what undoes good traders. I had this realization in my own trading a few years ago that I know what an A grade setup is. And every time they come through, I take them. That isn't the issue. The issue is sitting on my hands long enough for those A grade setups to come through and not letting my emotional state drive me to take subpar setups that undo all the hard work that I did up until that point. So in this video, I'm going to show you the psychology of patience, what goes on in your mind to drive you to take subpar setups, and how you can override that mechanism to sit on your hands and wait for your A grade setups to come through. I love this quote at SMB Capital. They say, one good trade. That's all it is. It's about waiting and taking the one good trade. And then once that's done, doing that exact same thing all over again, sitting and waiting for that next one good trade. And that's really what trading is. It's about knowing your edge and then sticking to that edge. Now, if we go back to that original problem that every trader knows what an A grade setup is, yet they get pulled into taking subpar setups and they get pulled into taking low grade setups when they're bored. And there are literal strings on your mind, the pullings of greed and fear that influence and drive traders to do things that they later regret. And there are four vectors that we're going to talk about in this video, or in other words, four strings that pull on your mind and drive you into making decisions that you later regret. The first one is this fantasy of something happening in the future that you perceive is profitable. This is future, this is past, this is positive, this is negative. We can create this idea in our mind that in the future, if I take this trade, it's going to give me a profitable outcome. It's going to give me money or percentage or R, or it's going to help me pass the funding challenge, or it's going to help me pay rent, or it's going to help me do X, Y, Z. And we can create these ideas, these greeds in our mind, these unrealistic expectations, and we can attach those to a trade. In our mind, we can say that this trade is what's going to bring me all these positive things. And we get pulled into taking that trade because of that greed, because of that expectation. And we may have completely altered reality in our mind because of that expectation. In other words, we may convince ourselves there's a setup there when there really isn't. Or we convince ourselves there's an A grade setup when there really isn't. And sometimes it takes a big painful loss to snap you out of that and make you kind of think, what was I doing? Why did I take that setup? The reason you took that setup is because in your own mind, you created all these positive expectations on the outcome of that trade, and that drove you into making a trade that you wouldn't usually take. Now, when we create these positive expectations, these greeds, these unrealistic expectations and fantasies that drive us into taking trades, we simultaneously birth fear in our mind. We birth the fear of missing out on and the fear of losing these things. And it's the interplay between the greeds and the fears that pull us like strings unconsciously to making decisions that, again, we later regret. So the psychology of patience is about mastering the greeds so that you don't have fear and greed influencing your trading and your decisions. And you're not driven out of fear and greed into trades early when you shouldn't be. Because when we're sitting, waiting patiently, and we create this idea of what we think the market's going to give us, we then are sprung into action out of the fear of missing out on that. Or we're running a little bit of unrealized profit and we're greedy over that and we're infatuated with that. And that drives us into the fear of losing that unrealized profit. So we close the trade early. And we lack patience before we get into trades, while we're in trades, etc., etc. So it's really a game of mastering your greeds that helps you quiet down your fears, that helps you be patient. Now, these greeds don't come from nowhere. They come directly mirrored from your past experiences. You see, you may have certain experiences in the past, very pleasurable experiences in your perception of where you perceive to have gained a lot of money. And the mind is just trying to recapture those. Or you may have certain very painful experiences, painful losses that are putting you in a state of anxiety, that are driving you to go into trades to alleviate that state of anxiety. But either way, we need to learn to manage our fears and our greeds to help us sit patiently and wait for quality setups to come along. And many traders create this idea that they're self-sabotaging. I'm not able to stick to my trading plan. I'm self-sabotaging. But really what it is unconscious motives. Every human being moves a muscle for a particular reason. You do not move a muscle without a motive. And self-sabotage, all it is, if you really dig deep and you understand what's happening on an unconscious level, you realize it's not self-sabotage, it's really just these unconscious motives that we have in particular moments. And really what happens is we're a trader, maybe we're sitting waiting for a setup to come through, and we get triggered into a state of boredom. We get triggered into a state of anxiety where we feel like we're not moving towards our goals quick enough, or we feel like we haven't made money this day or this week, and you get triggered. And that puts you into a certain state of anxiety or a state of feeling like you're worthless or useless or not making good use of your time. And then that drives you into a behavior like trading when there are no setups to be traded according to your plan. That so-called self-sabotaging behavior of taking trades outside of your plan or just creating ideas in your mind and taking random setups. And you're doing that behavior as a way to cope with the unwanted state, the state of anxiety. That's what this behavior is. All taking trades outside of your plan and being impulsive into the market, all it is a behavior to manage an unwanted state. And then what happens, because you're not aware of this unconscious motive of how the behavior is helping to alleviate a certain state, you then guilt trip yourself, you guilt and shame yourself. And guilt and shame, by definition, means you're consciously aware of the drawbacks, unconscious of the benefits, and therefore you repeat the behavior because there are unconscious benefits there, but you're just unaware of them. But if you're to take a step back and understand that you're being triggered in a certain way, and you have a way to dissolve those triggers of feeling like you're wasting time or boredom, if you have a way to dissolve those triggers outside of the markets, and you have a way to deal with the unwanted state, alternative strategies to deal with the unwanted state that don't involve you jumping back in the market, then you can actually alleviate over trading or trading when you shouldn't and stick to your trading plan out of patience. So to recap, the reason you break your trading plan is because it's a coping mechanism. And a coping mechanism for boredom, a coping mechanism for anxiety, feeling like you're not using your time properly, feeling like you're useless. I've seen multiple reasons, multiple justifications, but all breaking your plan is a coping mechanism because of an unwanted state. And part of the unwanted state is anxiety and fear. A big part of that is the anxieties and fears, because in our mind, we create ideas and we create ideas of what we think we can get from the market, the positive pleasure, the money, the percentage, the the freedom. And we therefore create a fear of missing out on all those things or a fear of losing all those things. And it's the pulling of the strings of greed and fear that drive us to make decisions that we later look back and ask ourselves, why did I make that decision? But all it is a coping mechanism for unwanted states and to help you alleviate certain states of fear. So what are practical steps that you can implement right now as a trader to increase the probability of being patient? What's the psychology of patience? Well, firstly, you need to make sure you have a mechanical plan, a trading plan that outlines step by step what your edge is. That's number one. If you don't have that, you're going to be more likely to be drawn into trades when there are no setups there available. Then, outside of the markets, you want to stabilize your finances. You want to ensure you have a part-time or a full-time job or cash savings. This helps alleviate the desire to trade because you need to pay bills and pay rent and cover expenses. Because a big part traders are drawn into taking trades is because of this fear of not making money or fear of not having an income or the fear of receiving bills or the desire to pay down bills. So if you stabilize your finances already outside of trading, you alleviate a big part of the greed to getting into the market when there are no opportunities there. Then you need to manage your boredom by going through the 7 areas of life and figuring out what of these areas are important to you through your health and fitness, your family and relationships, your mental faculties, your spiritual explorations, or your social leadership, business, finance, whichever of the areas are important to you, figuring out what goals you want to pursue in those areas and setting high priority actions and scheduling high priority actions into some sort of a calendar. So irrespective of whether there are opportunities that day to trade or not, you still have things to do and you're not bored. So you then only trade if there are opportunities, because you're fulfilled by other areas of life as well. Number 4, make sure you're implementing the Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset Tool 2.0. That's a step-by-step process I take you through to identify and ground your greeds in real time to ensure you're only taking trades that align with your trading plan. That's a completely free tool that I've created, and I put the link in the description, first comment. There's a little bit of a free course that goes with it, so make sure you watch all the videos with that and then implement the tool for 1 month straight, and you'll see yourself being able to identify triggers, manage unwanted states, and stick to your trading plan because you have a new level of self-awareness. And then number 5, you need to go in there and clear the baggage. Remember how I said that we have these 2 primary drivers, fear and greed, that drive us to taking trades outside of our plan. Those are directly, the greed here and the fear here, these are directly mirrored based on past infatuations and resentments. Strong infatuations over wins and strong resentments towards losses in the past that move us as a trader and make us react to the market, of wanting to capture that win again or wanting to run away from that loss again. And that drives us into trades sooner than what we should be driven into those trades. And we become very reactive as a trader. So the more of that subconscious baggage you clear, the past infatuations and the past resentments, and you go back to those moments and you broaden your perspective of those big wins, you find the pains and the big wins, and then you find the benefits and the pleasures and the big losses to stabilize yourself a little bit and address some of that baggage, then you become more poised as a trader. You become more present and you're more likely to wait out of patience and process when a trade aligns with your trading plan, as opposed to being reactive based on these subconsciously stored associations you have in your mind. So the more of that baggage you clear, the more patient you're going to be. And I cover that extensively in my mentorship 2.0. And that's really what a lot of that program is about, diving deep in the psychology and resolving it so that you can be a patient, process-based trader. All right, traders, make sure you check out firstly the Bulletproof Your Trading Mindset tool, then the mentorship, and you implement these steps here to ensure you have patience and you can stick to your plan. You're not run by fear and greed in your subconscious mind. If you found this useful, make sure you share it with your trading friends, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.